find a way. But just to come to him and he'd say, why not? I'll try that. Are you free? Can you do this? Can you be there? Go and meet so-and-so. It was in his nature to help people. I think that's one of the most important things about Harold, to understand, to the extent that I understand Harold, the influence on him of older, wiser, mentor, male figures, particularly. I'm thinking of Joe Brearley, the English teacher. I'm thinking of Arthur Wellard, a great England cricketer who became a great friend of Harold's. Beckett, I think, is in that category. People who W.S. Graham, a great poet, who he sought out. He wanted to go and find the people, Dylan Thomas, meet them, say, I think you're fantastic, I love what you do.
And you shared with me letters he'd written to Henry Miller, which are extraordinary.
Precisely. He wrote to Henry Miller out of...
And was written back.
And Henry Miller immediately engaged with him. So Harold was being taught how to...
And he was an 18-year-old writing to Henry Miller.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know what a remarkable thing about Henry... By the way, my first meeting with Harold involved Henry Miller. We're in grade 11, and Harold said to me, you might like to read this. What is it? I said. He said, it's a book by a man called Henry Miller, Black Spring. I took it home. It's just a wee bit different from books I've been reading.
The Wind in the Willows.
You've got it, that sort of thing. The House at Pooh Corner, Winnie the Pooh. It was a little bit different from Peter Pan. And so I read it, and I brought it back a few days. I said, so what do you think of it? I said, there's no shortage of excrement, he said. He said, is that all you've got to say? I said, I haven't even begun to say what I've got to say. So then our relationship started. But one of the things that needs to be said about him, before we raise him to the heights of sainthood, he was a lovely bloke and a generous bloke, but we'd be doing him a grave injustice to suggest that he was in any way a total saint. He could be terribly bad-tempered and behave badly, but I've never known him ever to be cruel. I've never known him to be unkind. I've known him to be terribly bad-tempered with unkind results. But he had a generous heart, and the funny thing was, he could have dumped all his old friends. He knew us from the age of, 16, 17, 6 of us. He could have dumped us all. And no hard feelings, he was famous. On the contrary, he remained fanatically loyal. To the end, I saw him the day before he went into his final coma. He kept on, and 3 of us are dead now, 3 alive. But he loved us and was loyal to us fanatically to the end. And I think it isn't just a tribute to us. I think it's something that Harry put his finger on. It was a very important compass setting for him. A geographical location bearing. These friendships, these relationships like he had with Harry and with the rest of us. Because for a man who was, I think, oversensitive, I think he writes plays about cruelty, like One for the Road, because he cannot bear cruelty. He is so oversensitive to the horrors of the world that he confronts them, but I think he was easily, too easily, affected by them in some ways, and he needed, I suppose we all do, location points of these friendships, despite however fashionable he became. Do you agree with me, Harry?
Well, I do, of course.
And a lot of human beings who absorb all of the cruelties by observation, by experience, can go in a different direction. They can actually alienate themselves. They can hide from other people. It seems that Harold knew that he needed them, needed you, and connection was important to him.
I think you're
whether
absolutely
it was conscious or not. Perhaps as a way of healing from that kind of sensitivity
And being restored to himself, being rebooted back into his. He could be so pulled out of himself by things he couldn't control, things he couldn't change, circumstances in the world that he was upset by, or relationships that had gone wrong. And towards the end of his life, one could meet him and he would feel exhausted and at the end of his tether and depressed. And then, I wrote about this when I wrote the obituary I was asked to write after he died. You know, the last time I saw him, which was a few weeks before that evening you had with him, but he was very depressed and very, very, very unwell and infirm and not drinking, so he was detoxifying. It's just in a terrible state. But I was about to direct a tribute to his friend Simon Gray in the West End, and the minute I mentioned Simon Gray's name, his whole energy changed, and suddenly he was back. You know, because he was able to channel himself back through something as meaningful to him as Simon Gray and his love of Simon and their friendship. And he absolutely came right fully back. He was able to name the names of actors from productions he'd directed 30 years before. Not only the names of the actors, but the characters they played. I mean, his memory was astounding, wasn't it?
Amazing.
And he had, so even to almost the end, if he could be relocated through that loyal connection to people, to the people who he knew he could trust, then his energy flooded back in. It's just his body gave up. He was cruel to me once, and only once, and I called him on it, and I wrote him a letter saying, you were cruel to me, and I don't need that in my life. And I delivered it by hand to his door, and then walked away from the house going, what have I done? How, you know, what have I presumed to... But he rang me the next day and said, let's have lunch. And our whole relationship changed from that day. And that was when we became really close after that, last 10 years or so of our friendship.
Yeah.
But, you know, like he was so insecure in certain areas that the idea that somebody could be upset by his behaviour was almost the worst thing for him. He wanted to make it good, you know.
But he was also a man who could say, I'm sorry.
Well, more than once, yeah.
More than once did he have to. But I can remember, we were it's very interesting.
And mean it.
But you
He
know,
always meant it.
people say, so did he change a lot when he was became famous? I said, what do you mean? He was always famous. He was always famous. We always thought he was famous. We thought we were famous too. We were completely innocent young solipsists, you know. If you don't shut up, I'll jump out of the window and kill us all, you know. And that's what we were like. And Harold, we took ourselves tremendously seriously. Once Harold offended the rest of us, myself and another young man, Jimmy Law, went and knocked on Harold's door. Thistle Wet Road, came to the door. We didn't speak, we just nodded. And we never had any money, so we used to walk for miles together. We call it going for a strawsy. But we walked and walked with him, and walked and walked. And then we got on a bus, neither of us speaking to him. It was a bit uneasy. And then we got off the bus and walked right into the middle of a rather large park, Victoria Park. Then we turned around and left him. And it was our way of saying, you have offended us. But I can imagine how seriously, how pompously self-important we were, and yet how innocently endearing that our actions had total significance. He was always famous. He didn't have to become famous. He was famous. He was himself. Didn't matter if he didn't have tuppence in his pocket.
But then there are echoes of the birthday party in that action that you took.
I was going to say, it reminds me of scenes in some of the films that he wrote.
Yes.
You know, the silent scenes.
You know, one of my favourite things he told me once was that he was in the kitchen in that same house, a teenage boy, with his mum and dad. He was an only child, and suddenly his mother fainted to the floor, just out cold. And his dad and he looked at one another, looked at her, and then his dad said, "Look after your mother," and he fainted. And so Harold is left there in the kitchen, an only child, and both his parents have just gone. And he's left standing there. He's 13 years old. And that image to me of...
I've never heard that.
That
It's
image...
wonderful.
It is wonderful, isn't it? And yet you can feel, I feel, how lonely that must have made him, how alarming that must have been.
What did he do?
Well, of course, he just looked after them. But that moment of... Bereftness, what do I do? A kind of Beckettian, you know...
It's also very funny.
It's also hysterically funny.
It's like Sam collapsing at the end of the film.
And very
What has he got, and drop dead?
It's very mysterious.
Give me a ride to London Airport.